You know what's absolutely wild? There are towns in America where your house price can swing 20% in 6 months. Based on federal policy changes you have zero control over. Where half the buyers are paying in pesos converted to dollars. Where your homeowner's insurance includes a line item for border security concerns. Where the housing market operates like a currency exchange that occasionally sells houses. I'm talking about border towns. The places that exist in economic limbo between two countries. Where the housing market doesn't follow normal American rules because nothing about these places is normal American anything. These are cities where a single executive order can crash property values. Where currency exchange rates matter as much as interest rates. Where you're competing with Mexican nationals buying investment properties and Texas retirees fleeing Austin and federal contractors on temporary assignments and literal nobody knows what's happening next week. So today we're going through 10 border towns where housing markets are in complete chaos. Because someone needs to talk about the fact that there are American cities where binational economics creates housing market insanity. Let's get into it. Here's why border town housing markets are uniquely chaotic and why it matters. Border towns operate in economic twilight zones. They're American cities, but they're functionally binational economies. People live on one side and work on the other. Currency flows both directions. Federal policy in both countries affects local markets, and housing markets reflect all of that. Chaos. The towns on this list share common factors that create housing market chaos. First is policy volatility. Every new presidential administration changes border policy. That affects everything: staffing, security, trade, cross-border traffic. Each change ripples through the housing market. Second is currency effects. When the peso is strong, Mexican buyers flood these markets. When it's weak, they disappear. Housing demand swings wildly based on exchange rates. Third is binational buyer pools. You're not just competing with local Americans. You're competing with Mexican nationals buying investment properties or second homes. Canadians. Federal workers on short-term assignments. The buyer demographics are unlike anywhere else in America. Fourth is security and insurance costs. Border towns have unique insurance considerations. Some insurers won't cover there at all. Those that do charge premiums. Security costs affect property values in ways that don't apply to Des Moines. And fifth is investment versus owner-occupied chaos. Many border town properties are investment properties for people who don't live there. Absentee ownership rates are high. That creates different market dynamics than typical American suburbs. The result is housing markets that swing wildly. Prices can spike or crash based on factors that have nothing to do with local employment or interest rates. It's economic chaos in real time. Number 10. Nogales, Arizona, starting with the Arizona border town that's literally split in half by a fence. Nogales has a median home price around $150,000 to $200,000. But prices swing dramatically based on border policy and peso strength. Properties can gain or lose 10 to 20% value in months based on factors that have nothing to do with the local economy. Nogales is basically one city split by an international border. Nogales, Sonora has way more people than Nogales, Arizona. The economies are intertwined. When peso is strong, Mexican buyers push prices up. When it's weak, the market stalls. The downside is Nogales is small and economically dependent on cross-border trade and traffic. When policy changes restrict that, everything suffers, including housing. You're buying into economic uncertainty. Nogales is where the fence runs through the middle of the housing market. Number 9. Del Rio, Texas. The Texas border town where military and border patrol create boom-bust cycles. Del Rio has homes ranging from $100,000 to $250,000. But the market swings wildly based on federal staffing decisions. When Border Patrol surges staffing, housing demand spikes. When they don't, it crashes. Del Rio is a military town plus border enforcement town. Laughlin Air Force Base plus Border Patrol. That creates transient population that affects housing. Lots of rentals. Lots of people who don't stay long-term. The problem is Del Rio's economy is entirely federal government dependent. Policy changes in D.C. directly affect housing demand. There's no diversification. You're betting on continued federal presence. Del Rio is where federal staffing decisions are. The housing market. Number 8. Calexico, California. The California border town where agriculture and immigration create housing chaos. Calexico has median prices around $150,000 to $350,000, which is cheap for California. But the market is incredibly volatile. Agricultural cycles, immigration policy, peso exchange rates all create wild swings. Calexico is agriculture and cross-border trade. It's functionally connected to Mexicali, which is way bigger. Housing serves farm workers, cross-border commuters, and people working by national trade. The downside is Calexico is isolated in Imperial Valley. Summer heat is brutal. Economy is agriculture, which is seasonal and low wage. Housing market reflects that instability. High vacancy, lots of rentals, absentee owners. Calexico is where California housing meets agricultural chaos. Number 7. McAllen, Texas. The Rio Grande Valley city where Mexican investment meets Texas growth. McAllen has prices ranging from $150,000 to $400,000, depending on area. The market is wild because you have Mexican nationals buying investment properties, Texas growth, and peso fluctuations all mixing. McAllen is the big city of the Rio Grande Valley. Actual economy, healthcare, retail. It's grown significantly, but the housing market is still heavily influenced by Mexican buyers and by national economics. The problem is McAllen's market swings based on peso strength. When peso is strong, wealthy Mexicans buy heavily. When it crashes, that demand disappears. You're exposed to Mexican economic conditions as much as American. McAllen is where Texas growth met peso volatility. Number 6. Douglas, Arizona. The Arizona town where copper mining died and border economics remained. Douglas has median prices around $120,000 to $180,000. The market is chaotic because there's no stable economy. Mining is gone. What remains is border-related activity and cross-border connections to Agua Prieta. Douglas is post-industrial border town. The smelter closed, mining declined. What's left is small town on the border with limited economy. Housing reflects that uncertainty. The downside is Douglas has no economic foundation beyond its border location. Population has been declining or stagnant. Housing is cheap because nobody knows what the town's future is. You're buying economic uncertainty at a discount. Douglas is where copper busts met border economics. Number 5. Brownsville, Texas. The southernmost Texas city where spasms met by national chaos. Brownsville has prices from $120,000 to $350,000. The market is insane because you have spasms building, Mexican buyers, federal policy changes, and peso fluctuations all happening simultaneously. Brownsville is the end of Texas, literally. It's also seeing spasms development, which is bringing in engineers and investment. But it's still a binational economy heavily influenced by Matamoros across the border. The problem is Brownsville's market is being pulled in multiple directions. Spasms wants to make it a space town. Mexican buyers want investment properties. Locals want affordable housing. Nobody knows which force wins. The chaos is real. Brownsville is where space exploration met. Border market chaos. Number 4. Yuma, Arizona. The Arizona city where agriculture, military, and snowbirds create market insanity. Yuma has median prices around $150,000 to $350,000. The market swings wildly because you have military Yuma proving ground, MCAS Yuma, agriculture, snowbird retirees, and cross-border economics all competing. Yuma is weird. It has military. It has agriculture. It has tons of snowbirds because winter is perfect. And it's on the border, so you get binational effects. All of that creates housing market chaos. The downside is Yuma is extremely seasonal. Summer is uninhabitable. 120 degrees regularly. The snowbirds leave. Agriculture is seasonal. The only constant is military, which isn't enough to stabilize the market. Yuma is where military met, lettuce met, snowbirds met. The border. Number 3. Laredo, Texas. The Texas city where trade is everything and housing follows trucks. Laredo has prices from $150,000 to $400,000. The market is completely driven. By cross-border trade. When NAFTA now USMCA trade flows well, Laredo booms. When it doesn't, housing crashes. Laredo is a trade city. Trucks, logistics, cross-border commerce. It's one of the busiest trade crossings in North America. The entire economy runs on that trade. Housing follows. The problem is Laredo is entirely dependent on trade policy between the U.S. and Mexico. Tariffs, trade agreements, border efficiency, all of it directly affects housing demand. You're buying exposure to binational trade policy. Laredo is where every housing transaction is a bet on free trade. Number 2. Nogales, Sonora. AMBO's Nogales effect on Arizona's side. Wait, we already did Nogales. But the chaos deserves more attention because the binational effect is so extreme. The Arizona side is housing that serves both sides of the border. Mexican nationals with U.S. legal status buy there. Americans buy there to be close to family in Sonora. The market operates as one city split by policy. When peso strengthens, Mexican buying surges. When it weakens, the market stalls. Insurance costs are higher because of location. Some lenders won't finance there. The market operates under constraints that don't exist in Tucson. The downside is you're exposed to both American and Mexican economic conditions simultaneously. Peso crashes. U.S. policy changes. Border crossing disruptions. All of it hits your property value. AMBO's Nogales is where one city became to markets that still act like one. Number 1. El Paso, Texas at number 1. The big border city where chaos operates at scale. El Paso has prices ranging from $150,000 to $500,000 depending on area. The market is chaotic because El Paso is big enough to have multiple economies, but still completely influenced by border dynamics. El Paso has Fort Bliss, which is enormous. It has universities. It has actual industry. But it's also directly connected to Ciudad Juarez, which has over 1 million people. The housing market serves both sides. Mexican nationals with legal status buy heavily in El Paso. Americans buy there for binational reasons. The currency effect is massive. When peso is strong, wealthy Mexicans drive up prices in nice El Paso neighborhoods. When peso crashes, that demand disappears and prices stall or drop. The military presence creates its own chaos. When deployments change or base staffing shifts, housing demand swings. Lots of rentals for service members who don't stay long-term. Insurance and security costs are higher than comparable Texas cities. Some insurers won't write policies in certain El Paso neighborhoods near the border. Those that do charge premiums. The downside is El Paso operates in permanent uncertainty. Federal policy changes. Peso fluctuations. Military staffing. Cross-border dynamics. All of it creates housing market volatility that doesn't exist in Houston or Dallas. You're buying into a market that can swing dramatically based on factors you can't control. A new presidential administration changes border policy and your property value changes with it. Peso crashes and half your potential buyers disappear. Military draws down and rental demand collapses. The irony is El Paso is actually a nice city. Low crime compared to stereotypes. Good food. Affordable relative to other Texas metros. But the housing market operates under unique constraints that make it more volatile than typical American cities. El Paso is where border economics scaled up to a major metro without losing the chaos. So what does all this mean? First, border town housing markets operate under different rules than typical American cities. Binational economics, currency effects, policy volatility. These aren't factors in Des Moines or Boise. Second, buying in border towns means accepting exposure to factors you can't control. Mexican economic conditions, U.S.-Mexico relations, federal policy, currency exchange rates. All of it affects your property value. Third, these markets can offer value because the chaos creates discounts. If you can handle the volatility, there are deals, but you're trading price certainty for affordability. Fourth, investment property dynamics are different. High absentee ownership, lots of rentals, Mexican nationals buying second homes. The owner-occupied rate is lower than typical American cities. And fifth, these towns aren't going anywhere, but the economics will stay chaotic. As long as they're on an international border, they'll have binational market dynamics. So there you have it. 10 border towns where housing markets are in total chaos. This isn't about immigration politics or border security debates. This is about economic reality. These towns exist in binational economic zones where housing markets respond to factors that don't exist elsewhere in America. For people living in these towns, the chaos is normal. They understand the dynamics. They know peso fluctuations matter. They know federal policy changes affect property values. For outsiders considering buying in border towns, understand what you're getting into. The prices might look good. The chaos is real. You're buying exposure to binational economic volatility. Some people thrive on that. They understand the cycles. They buy when peso crashes and Mexican demand disappears. They sell when peso strengthens and demand surges. They're playing a different game than typical American real estate. Others just want stable housing markets and should avoid border towns entirely. Because the chaos isn't going away, these towns will continue operating in economic twilight zones. 2 countries, 2 economies, 2 currencies, 1 housing market trying to serve all of it. So here's my question for you. Would you buy property in a border town knowing your property value depends on peso exchange rates and federal policy? Or is the chaos too much risk even for the discount? Let me know in the comments. Because border town housing markets are unlike anywhere else in America. And if you enjoyed learning about binational economic chaos, maybe subscribe. We cover housing markets, economic absurdities, and places where normal rules don't apply. Someone has to document border town housing chaos. Might as well be me.